Well, good morning again and welcome to Crosspoint. My name is Cale Courtwright, the preaching minister here, and we are so glad that you are here to worship with us today. You could be anywhere, including somewhere warm inside, but we are so thankful that you are here. And I want to say a big thank you this morning to our pretty new, but our valet team that's out here. Would you say thank you to them? They were out there braving that north wind right in the face of it, daring it to chill them, and they served you anyways. And we're gonna be doing that, and so we need other people, good men and women, that will serve in that capacity. And so we would love for you to participate in that. If you are new with us, again, we are so glad you're here to worship with us, and we would love to invite you to lunch next week. There is details in the bulletin how to RSVP, but also a pretty old school, just sign your name on a piece of paper out on the welcome desk. And so we would love to have you participate in that next week. Who doesn't like lunch? It's better when it's free. And so we'll see you next week at that. Crosspoint exists to make and grow disciples. That's what we're about here. If you wondered when you came in here this morning what you might get, what we're going to be going over, and it's different every week, but it's all for the same goal, to make disciples and to help you grow in your discipleship. That's what we're here for. Last week we kind of lined out what we hope to be about, how we want to do that over the next 5 years or so, and the way we said it is our vision is to be transformed, to be like Jesus in our life and in our relationship, not just for us, but for the sake of the world. That's who we believe Jesus is calling us to be. To say it simply, we want to live the Jesus way. We have lots of invitations, lots of ways to live our life. We want to live the Jesus way. That's what we believe as disciples. That's who we're called to live and be like. Now, what we did last week, we went through these 5 or so different metrics, ways that we want to live that out around discipleship, community, service, and in our marriages and hospitality. For more details, I want to invite you to go back and listen last week. It's a way to juice our podcast numbers, So you can go download that. First service, they thought that was funny, but they have a sense of humor, second service. But we lined that out there last week, and we'd love for you, if you missed it, to go back and catch that. That's what we want to be about. Now, if you are going to center your life on Jesus, you need to know what Jesus is about. You need to know what he thinks about how you should live, and there's no better place than to go to the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you have your Bible, I want to encourage you to go to Matthew chapter 5. Sermon on the Mount is Matthew's chapters 5, 6, and 7. And so for the next few weeks, we are going to be centered there. Again, to be a Christian means that I follow Christ. To be a disciple means that's who I follow. And so you want to ask yourself then, what does that mean? How do I actually live that out? Jesus, right here, in starting Matthew chapter 5, he really lines out his kingdom vision. More than that, what he does is, anywhere else in the Bible, we don't have this much uninterrupted teaching from Jesus, 3 straight chapters. And so if you want to know what it's like to follow him, it's a good place to center yourself. I would argue, and I think it would be pretty easy to argue this, that there has not been any greater teaching than this teaching, ever given from any teacher. The Sermon on the Mount has impacted leaders, not only Christian leaders, but all kinds of leaders. Gandhi referenced the Sermon on the Mount. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, mentions the Sermon on the Mount. Abraham Lincoln mentioned the Sermon on the Mount, just as far as its impact. We could keep going. Every great leader, in one way or another, if they've read the Sermon on the Mount, has been impacted by it. And I tried to do this week, try to kind of make some kind of like TED Talk reference here, because I thought if you just kind of, with the appropriate pauses, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, it'd be about like an 18-minute TED Talk. They knew something. Let's just, Jesus did the original TED Talk. Anyways, it didn't go very good. So, but I think that of all the teachings you can engage with, you can go watch all the TED Talks you want. no matter what degree program you have done or want to do, this is going to be the most impactful teaching that you encounter. Which is why we want to center our life on it for the next few weeks, why we want to spend some time on it. So there are 5 challenges I want to put before you. You don't have to do all of them, of course. Last week I referenced one, which is to memorize the Sermon on the Mount. And surprisingly, many of you have said, I'm going to do it. So I know I don't normally love this in a church, but I want to invite you to take out your cell phone right now. And I want you to scan this QR code. Listen, I see you on your phones all during church anyways, so you might as well do it now while I invite you to do it. And what I want you to do is I want you to commit to one of these. Let me explain to you what I mean by these. Memorize it, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think it's certainly possible that people all throughout cultures and histories, young people, old people, have memorized Scripture as a spiritual discipline to imprint those words on our heart and hopefully our mind and also hopefully our heart. But if that one's not going to work for you, maybe you could read the Sermon on the Mount daily. Every day, if you were to spend maybe the 15 minutes or so it would take to read it. Maybe on your commute, you used a different Bible app to read out loud to you. Here's the deal. It takes less than 20 minutes to read it daily, and I know you're going to waste 20 minutes a day. I know you're going to sit down, you're going to watch something for 20 minutes, you're going to scroll for 20 minutes. What if instead you read the Sermon on the Mount? One thing I think would be really cool is if in your families is if you were to read it out loud once a week. And imagine if you changed readers and maybe even versions. For my family, for an example, imagine a week where my 12-year-old son read it and from a version that wasn't as familiar to us. And how we might hear the Sermon on the Mount differently that day. The 4th challenge here is I would love for some of you to take the verses of the week and let it be the prompts for your prayers through your journaling this week. That maybe this week the Beatitudes, if you were to say, God, where are you speaking to me through this? Which one of those is really something you want to center on maybe for the week? And the last one I wrote a Create Art, the art challenge. And this is the one that I was going to cross off, but the staff really liked it. I'm not much of an artist, so I said, sure, but we'll keep it. So whatever medium you choose, what if you took the verses of the week and you just created some art around it? In first service, I invited that maybe people might even use AI to do that, and I have already seen a picture that AI created from the Beatitudes. So you don't have to do that one. I've seen it, but you could do something else. But if you do art, we would love to see those. Specifically, we know a lot in our youth group do some great work around that. So we would love for you to participate in one of those. So if you have scanned the QR code, what we would love is just to know which one you are going to engage with. And here's the deal. Kyle set it up for us, and so I get an email, and I already got a bunch from first service. So now there's kind of a challenge to second service, and those online is, can more of you commit than first service? We'll see. I'll report next week. There are also all kinds of resources I would love to point you to. The Bible Project being the main one. Last year, they did a lot of work around the Sermon on the Mount. They did 9 months worth of podcasts on it, and I would encourage you to go listen to those. There's also a book I read, one called The Narrow Way, or The Narrow Path. There's all kinds of writings around the Sermon on the Mount, so if you're interested, I can point you to more of those. Here's how the teaching starts in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. And I want to stop right there for a minute, because there are some things happening in these short words that if you weren't raised Jewish, you might miss. Today, you could go to the region of Galilee, and you could go up on a mountainside. If you've been to the Rocky Mountains, it looks a little bit more like a hill, but you could go sit up there and imagine where Jesus was sitting, where he was going. Mountain is important for the Jew, especially, because it is referencing something. Jesus goes on a mountainside. Yeah, there's some practical implications here, so he can look out so more people can hear him and see him teaching. But more than that, he is trying to give a message of who he is. Because there was a time in their past that Moses went up the mountain. and that when Moses went up the mountain, he received the law. Jesus is going up the mountain, and he's going to give the law. Now, he's going to say here in just a few short verses later, he did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. He goes up just like Moses, and it is there that he is going to give a new version of the law. Again, not to abolish it, but to fulfill it. To say, you have heard it said, but I say to you. So there is an important moment happening where Jesus is essentially saying, I am the new Moses. I am the better Moses, the one that you've been waiting for. And don't miss that Matthew gives you a detail, and it says he sat down. Jesus is taking the position of a teacher. He's not just passing by. It's not something that he's going to give that you should let go in one ear and out the other. This is something that you should know. You should hold on to these teachings. It's important enough that he sat down and invited people to listen. This sermon is vitally important. It's something that we should know if we are going to call ourselves his disciples. This sermon is not about how we achieve salvation. However, the sermon is about how you demonstrate your salvation. And here's what I mean by that. If you are not currently a disciple of his, you don't take the sermon and hope to cross some things off and then say, okay, now I have salvation, I'm done. But rather, Jesus is inviting us to live according to his way. That Jesus is inviting us into his kingdom. And if you're his disciple, if you're going to be part of his kingdom, then this is what life looks like. Jesus is not going to strong-arm you into the kingdom. He is not going to force you to accept this invitation. There's lots of kingdoms that will. There are lots of kingdoms in the world in his day and in ours that will say, you must live this way. That you're part of this kingdom, and so these are the laws that you have to abide by. Jesus is not going to do that. He's not going to make you live this way. It's a free invitation that we accept in order to live according to how he calls us to. So the point of the sermon, from a very high-level introductory point of view, is this is Jesus' vision of the kingdom. That if what the mindset that Jesus has for what his kingdom's going to look like, he's going to lay that out for us. He's going to call us to a countercultural way of life, that his kingdom looks different. Now, many have spent lots of words, whether discussion or writing, about whether or not the sermon is to be lived. Whether or not we're actually intended to live this way. And on one hand, you can understand why. If you have read the Sermon on the Mount recently, if you've heard it recently, you go, this seems impossible. It doesn't seem like I can actually live that way. That some people have said, that's just an ideal. And we're going to grow towards it over time. That we won't achieve it until Jesus returns. And you know what? Some of that, there may be an element of truth to that. But if you read the Gospel of Matthew, if you sit down and read Jesus' teachings, he doesn't seem to say that. He doesn't seem to spend a bunch of words just to say, you know what, you actually can't do it. Just watch me do it. That if you were to take Jesus seriously, it seems as if he goes, this is the vision for those who follow me. This is how you are called to live. Yes, the sermon sets an incredibly high standard for us. Again, this is our free invitation to live according to his way. And you won't do it alone. You will be empowered by his Spirit to live this way. And you will do it in the context of his community, what we call the church. Jesus is our model. And as we dive into the sermon now, we see that Jesus does live this out. He starts this way. Verse 3. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. So Jesus, he sits down and he starts his sermon in this way. And before we really dive into what he's talking about in the Beatitudes, what I want you to recognize two things. That Jesus is saying this in an actual place. We're reading it in 2024 in our church, in our homes, in our cars, wherever. But Jesus said this in an actual place. He was in the region of the Galilee. He can see the Sea of Galilee just off in the distance, which means he does not say this in Jerusalem. He does not say it in Athens. He does not say this in Rome. Now, if you were going to launch something, a product, something new, an initiative, where would you launch it? Well, in 2024, you certainly would go online, and you would do it in a way that you would hope to get lots of traffic. And if you needed something in person, let's say if you were in our town, here, you would go where lots of people go. Jesus, it's as if he is doing it in Wichita, Kansas, rather than in New York City. There's no shade to Wichita, Kansas. I've been there. Lovely town. But you know it's not New York City if you're trying to launch something. He's in the region of the Galilee, which means he's also with a different set of people. Jesus is talking not to the rich and the powerful. Eventually, he will have an audience with the Pharisees, with the Sadducees. He'll stand in front of the political leaders of his day, but he's not doing that yet. Instead, Jesus is speaking to the marginalized, the poor, the hungry, the sick, the outcast. And it's in this place, with these people, that he says, that's where I'll launch my kingdom. That's where I want to launch my ministry, my movement, is in this place with these people. And that should not be lost on us. Because in that place alone, doing it that way says something about what Jesus has in mind for his kingdom. Now, before we move on, I want to do a study really of the word blessed, because words are important and how we use them are important. I met a guy, I had a friend in grad school at Abilene Christian who had been raised as a missionary's child in Kenya. And so he grew up there and he spoke Swahili. And so when the movie The Lion King came out, he was very confused. Why is the lion's name Lion? Because that's what Simba means. And he has this friend whose name is friend, Rafiki. That's weird. His dad's name is Dad. He just could not stand this movie. He's like, there's no creativity here. But those words don't mean anything to you and I, right? It's as if you were in another country and you were to say to someone, and they said, did you, well, for the day, did you spill this milk? And you said, I plead the fifth. If you were in another country, that would mean nothing, right? But it means something to us. We use words like this often. Maybe before you have used words like bit the dust. Like the Detroit Lions last night, they bit the dust. The Cowboys 2 months ago, they bit the dust, right? Well, if you look it up, at least what I found is that, there were times there were cowboys, and if someone was shot, they would fall off their horse, and they would land, and they would bite the dust. Of course, now we use it, and until this week, I had no idea what that meant. So when Jesus says, blessed are, and you think about the word blessing, you need to make sure you understand what you think by the word blessing and what kind of difference there might have been for what Jesus meant by the word blessing. Because we use this in a lot of different ways. But what you need to understand is that Matthew was written in Greek. It was the common language of his day. And while Jesus probably spoke Greek, he taught in Aramaic. In the region of his day, that was their common language, Aramaic, which is not Hebrew, but it's a cousin of Hebrew, which is what the Old Testament was written in. So Jesus, in Aramaic, will reference the Old Testament Hebrew words, and then they will write it down in Greek. You see how it can kind of meanings can get lost when you're doing that much work, that much translation. And so what do you mean by blessing? Well, I started thinking about how we use the word blessing. You might say, well, bless your heart, you know. My son comes home and he's had a hard day and this happened and that happened. And we might say, well, bless your heart. And I don't even know what that means, but we say it, you know. Or somebody does something nice for you. They serve you in some way and you say, what a blessing. What a blessing. It's become so common. So here, Matthew uses a word that's hard to translate, especially when you keep in mind that he does not use the most common word for blessing. There's a more common word, but he uses a word that has some Hebrew roots. In the Old Testament, the word was used only 45 times, mostly in the Psalms and the Proverbs. And in the Old Testament, we probably would have translated it more like abundance or fruitfulness or protection. Another way to say it is, if you were to use this word, probably the most literal way to think about it is to say, instead of blessed, say the good life. It's as if when somebody points to someone else and say, they have the good life. The good life comes to those who are poor in spirit. The good life comes to those who mourn. It's the statement followed by the reality, why you believe that. Now, in the biblical context, blessing comes from God. That we might say to one another, you are a blessing to me. But in the biblical context, blessing comes from God. So it's more realistic to say, God is blessing me through you. That God does the blessing. You are in a state of blessing from God. But what Jesus points out here, he points out things that you would not think of as blessings. Things that when he starts to talk, he starts to teach, you go, well, hold on a minute. Something's happening here because this does not make sense. It doesn't sound like a blessing. He's speaking to people who are marginalized. They're hungry. They're sick. They're poor. They're not living a good life. They don't have a life that you would long for. See, the good life for many of us, it means health. It means a beautiful home, a successful career, a loving family with lots of great leisure time. Ultimately, it means an absence of pain, the abundance of comfort. Who doesn't want that? That's what we view as the good life. But what I just described is not the Jesus way, but what I just described is the American dream. What Jesus starts off here is he gives a different vision. He's not against any of those things I said, but he's going to give a different vision. Now, oftentimes, what we deem as the blessed life in our life, that's what we want. What we deem as the blessed life, as the good life, is what we end up aiming for and going for. So if for you, the blessed life is an abundance of riches, then you will orient your life typically to try and achieve that. If for you, the vision of the good life is the absence of conflict, then you will live in order to achieve that. And so you will try to avoid conflict at all costs. And you may even become a people pleaser because you don't want any conflict. If the good life is the absence of conflict, there are ramifications. And Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers. That whatever we deem to be blessed is how we typically live our life. So what we think the Sermon on the Mount should start like, what we think this should read like is, blessed are the rich in spirit. Blessed are those who have no reason to mourn. Blessed are those who are confident that they have it all together. Blessed are those who are full. Blessed are the ruthless that don't let anything pass by. And on it goes. What Jesus lines out, though, his teaching rejects our cultural brand of success. His teaching rejects what we think the good life should look like. And what he ultimately is doing is asking you to show up in a different way, to be different in his kingdom. The best life, the good life, is when we realize that nothing that we have is worth anything compared to the life that Jesus is calling us to. The best life is when you realize nothing you have is worth anything compared to the life Jesus is calling you to. The Beatitudes are the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. And what Jesus is going to do is, over the course of time, he's going to continue to reach back into all of these same themes. And he doesn't do it like you might expect. In fact, you could look at his whole ministry and realize that Jesus ministered a different way. That his kingdom looks a lot more like the Beatitudes, like that vision of life, than the one that we might think of. So there are two things about the Sermon on the Mount that I want you to think of, the Beatitudes, as you leave today. The first is this, that God blesses weaknesses, not strengths. God says, blessed is the weakness, not the strength. It's not the self-sufficient. It's not the person that is self-reliant that is blessed, but the one who comes to Jesus empty-handed. The one that comes to Jesus and says, I have nothing to offer. And Jesus said, blessed are you. See, for those of us who are his disciples, we are engaging a great reversal. That rather than the value systems, the estimation of the who are fortunate in our culture, Jesus rejects all of that and he turns it upside down. He offers an alternative system. Everyone thinks the kingdom is coming to Rome. It's coming to Jerusalem. The kingdom is coming to the rich and the powerful, to those who have it all together. And Jesus says, no, you come and you rely on me. You come and be dependent only upon me. The second thing is this. What we realize is that for those in the kingdom, we don't live for his blessing. We live from his blessing. Jesus starts the Sermon on the Mount and he says, blessed are you who have nothing, who are nothing. You are already blessed in the kingdom. There is nothing that you need to do to achieve this. This is a free gift from him. You don't live for his blessing. You live out of and from his blessing. Church, that's good news. You are blessed now, not because of who you are, not because of anything you did, but because he deemed it so. Because he said, you are blessed. And Jesus says it's coming to those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemaker, and yes, those who are being persecuted. That's the blessed. This kingdom is better. And church, we as his disciples are called to be kingdom people, to reject the ways of the world and to live according to his kingdom. So as we embark in the Sermon on the Mount, as we say yes to his calling to be a kingdom person, recognize that the Jesus way is not like the American dream. And so a question to take home with you this morning is to ask yourself, where in your life are you living according and for the American dream rather than for the Jesus way? He's calling you to a different path. He's not going to strong-arm you into it. He's not going to make you do it. But rather, it's a free invitation to a life that he's offering to you. In 7th grade, I took my first computer class. I had only, at that point in time, really played around on my parents' computer. And maybe it was typing class, I don't know, but I got in there and that was the goal of the class, that we would learn to type. And it's probably been a long time since you've thought about this, but I remember showing up and I thought, why is A not over here and Z not over here? I don't know who came up with the keyboard, but it doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. I know there's a whole reason behind it. It makes sense for the guy who made it up. So you learn it though, right? You're struggling, you're starting like this, but over the course of time, you get better at it. I don't know the last time you actually thought about the keyboard and where they are. You just type now, right? Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a whole theory out there that there are better keyboards. There are ones that the letters are in better places and you could type a lot faster, be a lot more productive. Imagine a world that tomorrow or Tuesday, whenever you go back to work, you show up and your boss said, I have for you a better keyboard. It's not the one you know, it's a better one. And you look down at it and nothing is where it's supposed to be. And so what do? You quit your job, right? Because nobody wants to do that. For many of us in our life, you did not choose the way that you have been living. That you were born and were raised in a culture. And so you are a living way and you figured out how to live that way. And it's fine. It works for you. We have conformed to a way. But Jesus is calling us to a different way. And it's as if you're getting a better keyboard. At first, it's going to feel disorienting. It's going to feel difficult. You're going to be back to typing like you did as a child. And the trust that we have in him is that even though his way looks different from the world's way, is that it is a better way to live. That there exists an abundance of blessings that only he can give. And it's available to us if we live the Jesus way. As I said at the beginning, you don't do this alone, though. As we close, our shepherds and their wives will be around the room. And I know there exists many needs for prayer in this room right now. And our invitation to you would be not to leave today without leaning on a brother or sister in Christ, letting them pray with you, letting them walk with you, whatever it is you are facing. Maybe it is you are experiencing great blessings from God right now, and you want to celebrate that as well. However we can be here for you, won't you come while we stand and sing?